All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Welcome to our first speaker series for the Student Design Hub called Design Leaders in Tech. The goal of this speaker series is to have our local tech leaders from Newfoundland and Labrador come in and discuss how they approach product development and how their products evolve over time. So before we get started, a couple quick housekeeping items. You may notice that you can't see other people in the WebEx. You're not alone out there. WebEx Events disables the chat function in favor of the QA section. So if you have questions throughout the session, please type them in the QA section. We can see them, and we'll be keeping track of them throughout. We'll be sure to answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. So please note that your QA questions won't pop up to everybody until we mark them as answered, but we'll see the whole queue. If you'd like to ask Howard your question directly, just please write in your question, "I would like to be seen," and then that way I can promote you to a panelist so that you can then ask Howard directly your question as opposed to having me read it out for you. And when you're promoted to panelist, you automatically get muted, so just if you do pop on the screen for us, you'll just have to unmute yourself. Please make sure you direct your questions to all panelists in the QA section, because then that way both Howard and I can see them. And if you're having any technical difficulties, please send us a little note in the QA section as well, and then we can try and help you troubleshoot. So without any further delay, I'm excited to hand things off to Howard Rideout, the VP of Engineering for Mysa Smart Thermostats.
Right, thanks, Kyle. Sorry, just making sure I'm sharing my screen here and that's working. All right, so thanks for the intro, Kyle, and really happy to be here today to talk with all of you and to share this presentation. So as Kyle said, I'm the VP of Engineering at Mysa Smart Thermostats, and again, really happy to be able to join you and to share some of our experience with you. So just a little bit on what I'm going to be talking about today. I wanted to give you some background on how Mysa got started, really the backstory, and then how we managed to design our very first product. So then we'll cover a little bit of how we approach the design process today, and finally a look at how our products have evolved over time since that very first launch. So, and then we'll clue up with a summary of some of the things that we learned along the way that we really wish we knew at the start, and maybe some of those will be helpful for you as well. So let's get going.
Sorry to interrupt, Howard, but it looks like your slides aren't visible.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, guys. It popped up as sharing for me. How's that?
There we go. We can see you now.
All right. Thanks, Kyle. Sorry about that.
No problem at all.
So you only missed this slide. All right. So this is really intended as a presentation on design and development of our products, but it's going to include a fair amount of the early days at Mysa and the company journey, because I believe that's really important to understand when you're talking about how an initial product gets created. And the story of the company is the story of how that first product gets designed in a lot of cases, and vice versa. So that's definitely true of Mysa. So we're going to start with the early days and go forward from there. So one thing up front, obviously no two company journeys are the same, but a lot of the challenges that we faced and the lessons we learned are generally applicable to many different products or companies. So getting to this slide, this is the early days of things. And this presentation gives me a chance to show some funny early pictures of our CEO, because why not? So some of you may not know that Mysa actually started out as Empowered Homes. Empowered Homes was an energy efficiency company that consulted and that conducted home energy audits, and they started in 2013, long before we were ever involved with smart thermostats. So, however, it was during these audits that Josh Green, our CEO, you see him here, identified a gap in the smart home market and realized that customers wanted a product for baseboard heaters, like the ones that existed for furnaces and central heating, like Nest and Ecobee that you can see here in the picture. So he went looking for one at the time and realized that there weren't really any good options out there. So he decided to build one. So fast forward a little bit to 2015, even though that idea came early on, there were still some stops and starts along the way. They actually spent some time building solar panels, which provided some additional heating to water in your home. That was the initial idea. This is an actual picture of Josh's parents' house with solar panels installed on the roof. So they were Mysa's very first beta customers. Fast forward a little further to January 2016, and it was in 2016 that he really pivoted away from those early ideas, going from an energy efficiency consulting company to become a hardware device company. It was around this time that he enlisted his brother, Zach Green, and they started on the process of figuring out how to make a smart thermostat. So they got involved with the MUN Center for Entrepreneurship. And I'm a little fuzzy on some of the details around this time. I didn't actually join the team until January 2018, but I've put together that early story from presentations and stories and things like that. So one of the other kind of interesting points is that our current VP of growth was working for the MCE at that time. So through a connection there, we ended up finding one of the team members. So again, still in 2016, the team also went through the Propel Program, which was another local program to help founders to have an idea. And this was also valuable in vetting some of those early details on what the product would look like and how they should go about creating it. And another interesting point here is that our current VP of product was running the Propel Program at the time. So it's really great making these types of connections. You never know what's going to come out of it. Right, and then it was off to Genesis. So the guys tell me this is when things got real. They applied and got accepted to the Genesis Center. So now they had an office space and the makings of a small team. And that's when the idea of a smart thermostat first started to really come together as an actual product. So fast forward through, I'm sure, a lot of development and testing and things through 2016. But the end of 2016 is when we were ready to start taking pre-orders, or at least we thought we were. So this was really a test at the time of consumer demand. We needed to answer the question of, if we built it, would people buy it? So we put up a shop page and waited to see what would happen. And this is what happened. So it took some time, as you can see from the timeline at the bottom of the screen. This just kind of covers the year of 2017, but that very early validation in the first few weeks and months was enough to prove that there was something there. And we ended up over the course of 2017, pre-selling 7,700 thermostats to our website, so to 2,700 customers. So there was definitely some interest there. And that validation was enough to lead us to our first investment round from two local investors, Killick Capital and Polaris Ventures. And they've been instrumental to our growth ever since then. They have seats on the board. They've participated in every investment round since the beginning, and they've offered tons of advice along the way. So they've been great. All right, so just wanted to show a picture of the team here at that time. So a little over a year after getting into Genesis, this is what the team looked like. It was very engineering heavy. We were founded by two engineers. In this picture, there are 4 software developers, 2 embedded firmware developers, a mechanical engineering student doing our mechanical design, and 1 board designer. And we had a total of 2 people doing marketing, one of whom was a student. So, and just in terms of product design at this point, to bring it back to product, like the founders were really our first product designers. Josh was the one that recognized the need, and he and Zach helped define that early feature set and what it was going to look like. There was definitely customer research, and that was done maybe accidentally through the first person interviews that Josh was conducting during the energy audits for Empowered Homes. So a lot of the components you hear about in good product design were present. Customer research, recognizing a gap in the market, the feature specification, the physical design, really all done at that time by the founders and the team as kind of by committee, which is very typical in an early stage startup when you're wearing many different hats. So moving on to look a little bit more on some of the challenges that we faced in those early days. So I really like this picture. It shows a view of how things evolved. And the question is, how did we go from the early wooden prototype you see on the left, which that actually is a black painted wood block, to the more fully formed product that can connect to the internet, that was built in a proper manufacturing facility, and that was safety certified to be installed in people's homes, that you see on the right-hand side. So zooming out a little bit, the challenge is really, how do you do anything at this stage? The problem at the early stage is that everything is new. You have to learn a huge number of new skills, do a ton of things you never did before, and maybe never even knew about. So from things like incorporating a company, hiring and paying people, creating cloud infrastructure, if that's the type of product you're building, getting a product certified, as was our case, getting funding, things like that. So some things are simple until you actually sit down to do them. So not to mention that you have to design and create a product also, which you've probably never done before. So when you assemble around a new idea, it's unlikely that you're going to have the specific experience that's going to make that product development really straightforward. So those early days are filled with a ton of new experiences and just this gigantic learning curve. So you need to kind of accept that there's a lot of things that you're not going to know, and that a lot of things are going to be new. Josh, our CEO, was fond of the quote, "Get comfortable with being uncomfortable," because you're going to constantly feel that way. It'll feel like you don't know what you're doing, which a lot of times you won't. And I still feel this way almost every single day. I've been working at startups for over a decade, and it's still a regular occurrence. So that may not be super comforting if you have a new product idea, but there's a lot of truth there, and it just really helps to have that type of mindset going into it. All right, so let's look at some more of the details of what that early process looked like for Mysa. So the early design phase is really all about iteration. Iteration on physical design, what does it look like? Iteration of the feature set, what does it do? Iteration of the interface, how do people interact with it? And it's really important to have quick ways to do these things. So whether that's 3D printing, if you're building a physical product, short build times in the case of software, prototypes for demo and testing, which is important in both cases, and also willing participants to help you test, which in those days it often ends up being family and friends. So you want to keep that iteration and feedback loop as really as short as possible, so you can try as many things as quickly as possible, because there's really no way you're going to get it right on the first try. So be prepared to iterate. On the building it side, when we got to the point where we were ready to build it, we headed to Ontario, to Toronto, to find a manufacturer. It just wasn't possible to find custom electronics manufacturing in Newfoundland, and to build it from scratch ourselves just didn't make any sense and wasn't an option. We didn't have expertise or facilities, and that could never actually scale. So, but we decided to keep it close to home and just go to Toronto. The benefits of that were several. It's a short flight to get there, of course. We could visit often, and we needed to again iterate on the production process even after we launched. That was a huge advantage in those early days when we were trying to make all the adjustments. And if we had to try to do that from St. John's, for example, if we were in China, that would have been extremely difficult and a lot more expensive. So it was a good choice early on to keep that manufacturing close to home. It also was a similar time zone, of course, which made communication a lot easier. We were talking to them pretty much daily at the beginning as we tried to ramp our output capacity, improve our yield rates, and things like that. So how do we go about selecting them is a question. What I think at this early stage, we didn't have a lot of contacts, and we ended up doing some internet searching and found a few candidates that we ended up setting up tours. So we toured their facility, met their teams, and got price quotes from each of them. So based on that information, we made a call on which one we were comfortable going with, and we ended up finding a really good partner. Their name's Micro Services in Markham, Ontario. They're like a low to mid volume production facility. We were expecting 1,000 to 2,000 units per week from them. So we ended up with a good partner. I will say that it worked really well for us. They were extremely accommodating and flexible, especially in those early days. They were used to working with companies, new companies, which made it easier. So I'll talk about some of the delays that came earlier. They were really helpful in mitigating the effects of some of the delays that we experienced early on. So I also wanted to mention another important aspect about those early days in terms of how we got the product built. So outsourcing things that we needed help with became important. So we used Upwork for some design assistance when we didn't have in-house expertise. They proved useful. And we also used another really good example is a company called Assembly. So they ended up being critically important for us in the early days. They're a company based in California, but their specialty is assisting companies build products in China. So they have a lot of Chinese employees on the ground in China. And that even though we didn't build in China at the beginning, we did source a lot of materials from there for those early manufacturing runs that we did in Ontario. So saying that, I would not recommend to do it the way that we did it. We made the decision early on to source a lot of materials ourselves in the belief, I think, that it would be faster or maybe that it was necessary or just the way you should do it. But in hindsight, for a hardware product, ideally, you really want to outsource as much as you can to a single manufacturer. While it does put a lot of responsibility or risk on that kind of single entity, the alternative is spreading it over a bunch of companies that you don't know, essentially, and is not necessarily better. You still have a lot. You end up having a lot more things to manage in that case. So, and it's an important point because remember, manufacturing a hardware product, if a single screw is missing, you can't ship the product. So all the pieces need to be there. So having just someone kind of at central responsible for that is helpful. Although, so we found a great partner to help with it, and they were instrumental in our product launch. I wouldn't really recommend this path, but if you ever do need to get something done in China, I highly recommend their team. They were great. So certifying it. So I won't spend a ton of time here, but for hardware products, and depending on the type, this can be a very important and difficult step. So this tripped us up for about 6 months prior to launch. We planned to launch in October of 2017, but we didn't actually ship until late February 2018. So that delay was mainly due to the failure of several certification tests. In one case, we even flew down to Boston area to be on site for some of the tests, but those ultimately failed. And then once we did get back, it turned out those tests weren't even required. So that's why I say it's complicated. I naively thought that product certification would be all fairly straightforward. It's a standard, and you run the tests, and that's kind of it. But that was a very wrong view of things. That's not the case at all. The standards themselves, while they're like detailed requirements, they don't say exactly how you test something. So there's a lot of things that are open to interpretation by the testing house that's actually conducting your tests, and they can make different decisions based on engineering judgment. So not being standards experts ourselves, of course, we really needed to rely on the certification agency to tell us what needed to be done. So here too, it's really important to find good partners, but we didn't know anything about the process at the time. So we essentially took the first quote we got, and it ended up not being a great partner. We went with Ifttt, the ones on the left, the ETL logo you see there. If you look around your house at any electronics, you're likely to see that logo all over the place there. They test tons of different products. So, but they didn't really make things easy on us. They seem mainly concerned with charging us for additional testing rather than really helping us get a safe product to market. So that improved immensely though when we switched to TUV, the company in the bottom right there. They were much more accommodating and helpful, and felt like they would work with you to solve problems when they came up. So that again goes to the theme of finding good partners to work with being very important in the early days. So moving on to launching it. In February 2018, we finally got past those certification hurdles, and we had passed all the tests. So the team headed to Markham, to MicroArt, to oversee that first manufacturing run. Boards were prepped, and all we needed to do was program and assemble things. But some issue came up at the time as well. Poor yields due to having soldering issues on the boards, programming failures, mostly due to poorly constructed test fixtures that we built ourselves. Slow assembly times as well. So the early design of a thermostat wasn't designed well for manufacturing. There were too many screws and too many steps in the assembly process. So we ended up having to make some adjustments there as well. So the final hurdle to any certification is actually a factory inspection by the certification agency, in this case, Ifttt. So the last wrinkle that was thrown at us in that process was that our power supply that we were using turned out not to actually be UL certified, even though the data sheet listed that it was. So luckily at the time we had two separate power supplies, although limited supply of the actually certified one. But we were still able to launch after the inspection in smaller quantity, and now we had to figure out how we were actually going to actually get the second supply, the one we wanted to use, tested and approved. So that was a bit of the launch journey. So I've been focusing a lot on the hardware and product aspects of the launch, but definitely just as important to us as a company was managing customer expectations around the launch itself. So as I mentioned, we started taking pre-orders in late 2016, but we didn't ship until early 2018. So the promises of shipping in 2017 didn't come true, and people were understandably not super happy about that. So to be honest, we didn't do a great job of managing the customer expectations through that period, mainly due to the uncertainty around certification and how long it was going to take, and how long it was going to take even to get our final software work done. And by underestimating that, we were kind of put our marketing team in a tough spot, in a difficult position, and they weren't able to give customers a clear picture. So it's the piece of advice there, I guess, is it's hard, and you need to try to strike the right balance when you're trying to do a product launch. You want to communicate frequently, which we were doing, but in this case, it was mostly to inform of bad news at the time. So it's another thing to keep in mind. And just the overall product development journey timeline of our first product, starting the idea spring 2016. First prototypes came later that year. We started taking pre-orders at the end of the year, and then throughout 2017, just design refinement and testing, hardware, software development across the board. We sent for certification in September of that year, and we got the final certification. It took about five months or so in January. So, and then after manufacturing started, it still took us about until July to produce the first 10,000 units and cover off all of those pre-orders. So that's just a high level of that journey, and just want to show like a few of the pictures from that first production run. So this is actually the production line at MicroArt. You can see the stations there, cases and heat sinks and boards themselves, and they're just trying to figure out what's the optimal way to put this thing all together. These are the first finished Mysas that rolled off the line, batched up. First boxed units, you can see, which we helped put together ourselves in some cases. And then the first shipment that's ready to go out in February. So that was the initial launch in 2018. I want to shift a little bit now to we actually pivoted, or we actually transitioned our manufacturing. In May 2018, while we're still in the middle of that first manufacturing run, we knew we really had to reduce our bill of materials and our manufacturing costs, the product cost overall. And we believe the best way to do that was to take our manufacturing to China. We reached out to several contacts in our now growing network and got some references and referrals, and decided once we had some visits lined up to head off to China and tour some facilities. So I will say, like, touring those facilities in China was amazing. Like, it's very impressive to see in person, and it's just to see the entire supply chain and assembly process and logistics that kind of makes up a really well-oiled machine in China. And there's a reason they're the go-to manufacturing hub, especially for electronics in the world, right? They've got expertise and large workforce and just all the infrastructure in place needed to do it. So that was a really interesting trip. And we were lucky to ultimately find an excellent partner who specialized actually in IoT products and line voltage thermostats. So we were very lucky to find a really good fit in that initial trip. And they also came in at the best price, which was a nice bonus. Just a couple pictures of their facility. So very well maintained, very clean, and larger capacity than we were working with in Ontario. This is a picture of the production line from the first setup trip. You can see there's soldering stations on one hand. On the right, we've got test fixtures for testing and programming, and then there's assembly stations and boxing, all in one, basically 20 or 30 foot span of assembly line. So it was great to see that finally come together. And here's just a picture of the team that helped make it happen at the time. So the company, the manufacturer we went with was called Sevco Global in Shenzhen. And they had a higher volume, more than double the capacity that we could do in Ontario at the time. And the cost ended up being 40% less as well than we could achieve. Okay, so I want to shift now a little bit to how do we try to do things now in terms of product design. So one of the main things that's probably different is that we now have a product team, and their job is really to be the voice of the customer, to figure out what customers want and create requirements for the engineering team so we know what to build. So here's a view of an early kind of research spreadsheet that was put together for our latest product, an AC controller. And this is just mostly put together through publicly available information on our competitors or competitors that existed at the time, and to create a broad view of kind of what the landscape looked like. So continuing on the research theme, there's competitor research was definitely a big thing. Just kind of see what customers expected out there, and it came from Zach Green, our COO, and essentially he read every review from all the competitors for over a year. So he's also a big input into the product team with ideas and information. So he's definitely a big part of the process. So I mentioned the product team, and they part of their responsibility is maintaining a long backlog, or creating the long backlog of ideas that we currently have. Some of those come from our strategic direction as a company and how we can complement our existing suite of products. But it's definitely an evolving process itself. I wouldn't say we've gotten it 100% right yet, for sure. And we learn something new every time we go through it. But we try to incorporate all those learnings. Actually, that's one of our core values. We use the phrase #AGB, always getting better. And we found that to kind of be an excellent rallying point for the team. Like when things go wrong, as they inevitably do, it's all about kind of what we can learn from it so we don't make that mistake again, and that other teams can learn from the teams around them. So moving on in the kind of the design process, we use prototyping, and at first the thing started as 3D renders. So we've got a tool that we use for rendering product designs. So we'll try different shapes and styles and sizes, different features and buttons and things like that. So this is just an example of one of those things. Another one here, a round shape that we played around with to see what that would look like. And once you move on past 3D renders, we typically move then into 3D printed components. We've got 5 different 3D printers in-house at varying levels of quality. On the left, you can see here some early designs to see how things fit together. On the right, this is actually an outsourced supplier to get a better idea of the mechanical fit that we were going to be able to achieve with our product. And this was the inflow product. So a variety of different tools and suppliers and techniques we use to kind of do that early prototyping. Then we move on to actually molded parts. So these come from our manufacturer after we've sent the design files to them. And these are some internals of AC, our latest product, and one of them looking at how the light kind of shines through from the LEDs in the center there, how the clips are going to fit into the stand and how they work. And then on the right, one of the first samples of a faceplate acrylic that we got. So lots of different sampling occurring at this stage. Like you need to sample every single component and make sure it's to like your design specification. And so there's a ton of different things to take care of at that point. And then you move on to finally assembled units. Now, these don't have the faceplates yet, but now we can mount the product and put boards in them and test functionality. And I guess one of the things I'd also like to point out here is that you can probably notice a common theme. There's a very common design aesthetic for our designs. And what we've done really is kind of create a platform that we can build upon for each new product or each new version of a product. We start with common design elements and iterate on those rather than starting from scratch. That allows us to get to a finished product much more quickly and leverage all the things that we've already built. So a lot of developing new products is how quickly you can do it. And there are already enough challenges and things that can go wrong. You really don't need to reinvent the whole thing every time. And so we've built upon the foundation that we created and found that allows us to do a lot more with a smaller team as well. And that's true not only for our hardware design, but for our firmware platform and software infrastructure across all our products. A little bit on the in-house design. So one of the other things that we've done intentionally is to keep key functions in-house rather than outsourcing them. So I spoke earlier about the importance of finding good partners, but just as important is kind of deciding what you're going to hold on to. So we made the decision to hold on to things that we were good at and that would allow us to differentiate. So what is important and what those key things are, it will vary from company to company, maybe even product to product. But for us, it was things like the design of our app and our software infrastructure, and then also the hardware design. So we kept those things in-house, and the things we outsourced were manufacturing, of course, logistics, even the website infrastructure. Like we use Shopify in our to create our shop pages and things like that. So things that problems people have already solved that we don't need to do ourselves. And so it's important to figure out what those things are for each new product and company. All right, now I want to spend a few minutes talking about product evolution. I really like this picture because it shows very first version on the left of our baseboard thermostat, and this is actually called the display board. So you can see the LEDs in the center, and the white squares in this case are where the touch buttons are. So and then we move down, we get a little smaller. That's our in-floor product, and then down even further than that on the right, there's two other prototypes that we've been experimenting with so far. So you can see it's really about evolution, not revolution. So there's a lot of common design elements across all of these. It's very iterative, and it allows you to leverage that software and firmware work that's already been done as well. So we found a lot of advantages to kind of approaching the problem that way. Now, so looking at the kind of evolution and expansion, talk a little bit about our product lineup, and we've expanded our product lineup from that initial baseboard product in 2018 to electric in-floor heating in 2020, and then now this year to air conditioning as well. So what we're trying to create here is a lineup of the best smart thermostats on the market for electric heating and cooling, and really staying within the things that we know how to do, and also staying within the same like HVAC space. So drilling down just a little bit specifically on particular products, taking our second product in-floor, just product selection is a tough thing. In this case, we chose something that built on the skill sets and areas of expertise that we already had. This is also a line voltage product, very similar to a baseboard product. We didn't think that it made any sense to choose something completely unfamiliar and in a whole different area, which may have required hiring a whole different set of people. That wasn't also a really scalable approach. So we applied a ton of the lessons that we learned from that first product development, transferred over here. We tried not to make the same mistakes again, only new mistakes. And we incorporated some of the early feedback that we got on that first product as well. So there were some advantages for sure. And then now on this product number 3, our AC for air conditioners. This is not a line voltage product, but it allows us, and the reason we wanted to do this product was it's a different market. We're now able to do heating and cooling, and take advantage of the growing mini split heat pump market. But it still leveraged a lot of the similar skill sets that we already had. It's similar hardware, and it's similar but more complicated software. It's sold in the same, we could sell it in the same way through online and through Amazon, things like that. But it definitely was our biggest challenge yet. We just launched the product basically 3 weeks ago to pre-order customers. And honestly, we're still dealing with some of the challenges right now. We're still getting that early feedback from people, and we're in the process of fixing issues and fixing bugs as we go. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about the ways in which the software itself has evolved. So here's a summary slide of some of the things that have been added or improved since we launched the very first version of Mysa baseboard. And so just briefly at the highlights, like energy charting to view your usage within your home, and how much energy and then how much cost that you're getting charged for your heat. We added in the ability to chart that out. Geofencing, so when you leave your home, the heat can turn down. When you arrive home, it turns back on. Shortcuts. In the original product, we didn't have the ability to segregate things by home, and so that was added afterwards. Button lockouts, so you can kind of keep whether it's tenants for landlords or kids from changing the thermostat. We added that feature. Mode selection, whole home energy, so you can view that energy chart for your entire home together. We added some physical features, haptic feedback and floor sensing, floor temperature sensing on the in-floor product. Shared access definitely improved and expanded since the start. Smart alerts to indicate when things are reaching certain thresholds in the home. A whole range of scheduling improvements across the board. One really interesting feature, the smart early on. That's really it's a machine learning algorithm we developed to actually determine how long it takes your room to heat up. So now, your thermostat will smartly decide if it only takes 15 minutes, it'll come on 15 minutes early, and if it's 45, it'll come on 45, whatever that number is. And it's just another way to save energy and only heat for only the amount of time that you need to. So some others there, maximum temperature limits, again, kind of a landlord feature if there are tenants in the space. NFC pairing was added on our in-floor product as well to make the pairing process, which can be quite tricky getting it on Wi-Fi, to make that better. And also smart integrations, HomeKit for iOS, Alexa, Google, their offerings and their integrations have been changing constantly for the last 3 years, really. So keeping up with those and adding the enhancements as they come has also been a big part of the updates. So as you can see, there's a lot of things, and then of course constant bug fixes. And we do all this, and for us, we have this capability. We do regular over-the-air updates of the firmware for all of our devices. So, and then the app gets updated through the App Store. So it's I think a big advantage to be able to make your product better over time and be doing these constant improvements. So just briefly on how the decisions for these features are determined, how they come about. So they're really driven by a number of things, but a couple big ones. One is definitely the goal of making a product that's just loved by our customers. So the source of a lot of the decisions comes from app reviews and customer support feedback, and really that direct information from our customers on what they're having trouble with, what they'd like to be able to do, what they'd like to see. And then also our corporate strategy in terms of where the company is going and how our suite of products kind of drives that. So we've maintained an internal product roadmap, and the product team kind of is responsible for maintaining, collecting, and prioritizing all of those things, so the development team knows what's coming next. All right, just to kind of summarize a little and collect some of the lessons learned. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Those early days are really about staying above water and learning as fast as you can. That early design is all about iteration, figuring out how to iterate quickly. And for us, that meant finding good prototyping tools, keeping that early manufacturing close so we can quickly address things, outsource the things you're not good at, and then choose good partners when you do. Talk to your customers as much as possible, and give yourself definitely a lot of time to beta test. That part of the process is very, very helpful. Seek out advice from people who've done this before. With the various programs that we've participated in, like Propel and Genesis and the Creative Destruction Lab and Lazaridis, they've all been helpful for talking to people who have experience with this stuff. And so you build up that network, and that ends up becoming invaluable. It's led us to a fantastic manufacturing partner, resulted in several senior hires, and played a part in countless other decisions for the business. So lastly here, hire good people. Well, that seems it's easy to say. I didn't talk a lot about team during the presentation, but I feel I can't finish without mentioning it. It's definitely one of the most important things. So building a great team will help overcome a ton of product challenges. And it's really easy to get lost in product details, but you really need to resist that urge and spend some time in the early days focused on the type of people you want to hire and what you want your team to look like. They're a huge part of building a successful product. So on that note, just how the team has evolved over time. Showed you this picture earlier. This was in May 2017, team of about 12. This is in January of 2018. So we're about 18 people here. Early 2019, 25 or so. And then later on in 2019, we got to just under 50 people. So I don't have any pictures from 2020 as a group for obvious reasons, but figuring out how to scale and grow your team is really important. But that's an entirely different presentation. So that's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Howard. Remember, folks, if you have questions for Howard, please type them out in the QA section. And if you want to ask Howard a question directly, just let us know in the chat. I'd like to be seen, and we'll promote you to panelists so that you can ask Howard directly. So I'll kick off with a question, and then hopefully we'll see some additional questions coming in the chat. But so Howard, what was some of the most impactful feedback that you've gotten from customers? I know you guys spend a lot of time looking at customer feedback, but was there a particular piece of feedback that customers gave you that had a really impact on the product?
Yeah, you're right. There's just tons of things coming in all the time since the beginning. I guess again, very specific to our product being an IoT smart product. There was a lot of challenges around the Wi-Fi pairing process itself. Like that's a really tricky thing because there's a lot of variables, so many different types of phones, so many different types of routers in people's homes, and just the quality of their connection and things like that. So it's been a consistent piece of feedback throughout, and something we've been working on since the beginning to steadily improve all the way through. So that's definitely been one of the, I guess, the key learnings throughout the process. Like that part of it is never done. There's so many variables. It can always be better, and we're still right now even iterating on that process.
Oh, that's great. I mean, that's definitely a common theme you touched on, was the iterative design process. So for all of our engineering students out there and budding entrepreneurs, remember, iteration helps you get to a refined solution. So we have a question from Johan in the chat. Johan asks, when you were beta testing, did you need to do any certification?
So I touched on it a little bit on the safety side. So the type of product we were building required, I guess, several types of certification. One of them being safety. So baseboard product is controlling the line voltage, 240 volt connection in your home. So it requires a safety certification, like to a UL standard. And so yes, that was one of the main ones we had to do, and the thing that early on tripped us up. There's also like EMC testing, electromagnetic interference testing, that you need to pass. Kind of requirements coming from the FCC, so that the Wi-Fi, any wireless signals and things you're emitting from your product don't interfere with other things in the home. So those are two like big certifications, and the other places that certification comes to play is on the smart home integrations. HomeKit itself, HomeKit is the Apple certifications, what Apple uses in their home app and allows you to control through Siri and things like that. So HomeKit requires certification testing you have to send to a third-party laboratory. So and now Amazon for Alexa is requiring a similar thing. So those are additional certifications that we also have to do and send devices out for and test for.
Great, thank you for that, Howard. Johan, if you had any follow-ups to that, just ping them there in the chat. Question from Victory. What do you consider a key thing that helped drive traffic to your test page that brought about 70,000 pre-orders?
That's a really good question. So on the number, 70,000 would have been fantastic. It was just over 7,000. But I honestly wasn't on the marketing side of things. But so I've got kind of limited knowledge of that area. But I do know, well, we used a lot of social media, like running Facebook ads and using Google search tools. A lot of those things that are really available and that are typical for like online, I guess, starting an online business. We did like in Facebook ads. I know we did a bunch of A/B testing where we would iterate on the ads themselves and figure out which ones would perform better and then display the one that performed best. So there were things like that done to kind of boost the traffic and boost the conversions throughout the process.
Great. So we had a question from Iman. Howard, it's a bit long, so I'll read it out and then I'll let you address it. So okay. Iman asks, I'm curious how you manage prototyping. In the design process, there are usually various expectations and designs for the product. For testing, did you use common prototyping tools like Arduino and Raspberry Pi and modules? Or did you invest in creating and designing your hardware circuits from scratch, even though it might cost more at the prototyping stage, but had benefits later?
Good question. I can see it too, so that's helpful.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. In the really early days, I'm pretty sure, again, that part was a little bit before my time, but if you remember that challenges picture that had all of the different product evolution phases, there was a breadboard design in there. I'm pretty sure that used either an Arduino or a Pi along the way, so that we used like a different type of processor to, I guess, probably mimic some of those functions in that case. That was the early days when we were just trying to flesh out the functionality and what it should do and things like that. But after we got past and down the path on that first product, and we ended up using a microcontroller, a microprocessor product from Espressif. If you've heard of the ESP32, it's actually a microprocessor and Wi-Fi module all in one. And so once we had that's what we chose for pricing, and it was also a pre-certified Wi-Fi module, so we didn't have to do additional Wi-Fi certification. That was another advantage, and the price was also really good. So once we had the base firmware for that chip, we were then able to like build on top of that. And so for all future prototyping of products, we essentially had the starting point. Like we put an ESP32 on a board and connect a few inputs, and we had a prototyping circuit that we used then to build all the subsequent products. So past that early design stage, like I said, we've leveraged that platform that we had already built for future prototyping.
Great. Iman, if you have a follow-up question, please just ping us in the chat. The next question is from Mona. What's the range of pricing on your products?
The baseboard product is $129, and depending on sales, sometimes for $90 you get it for $99 around Black Friday. I think things have changed just slightly. Put put me on the spot on that one, but the in-floor product is started at $249. I think it's since gone down a little bit from there. And then the AC product is in a similar range from 119, 129, similar to the first baseboard product. So again, depending on sales, if they're available, usually Black Friday and November, it's typically been our biggest kind of sales month. So you'll get it a bit cheaper, but like that's the range.
Great. So while we wait for some more questions to trickle in, Howard, I had another one for you. What's the best thing about being a designer at a startup company?
It's a good question. I think like the thing I really love about working at a startup company, and it includes definitely product design, is the number of different things you can do. You're not just confined to that one thing. Like if you're the product designer, you're not just, you might be designing not only you've got a hand in designing not only the mechanical interface and look and aesthetic, but also then potentially the boards and which components you use. And so we've got actually a small hardware design team. There's only really 3 people on that team, and we've been able to keep it small. So they have a hand and a say in a lot of the different decisions that happen. And so I think the breadth of the things that you get to do is definitely a great aspect of that like designing at a small company.
Great, thank you. That's a great answer. Any more questions in our audience out there that they'd like to ask Howard? I don't want to monopolize his time. All right, Howard, I'll ask one more, and then if we don't have any more follow-up questions, I guess we'll conclude. What's been the most popular feature amongst your consumers?
Think about that one. I think it varies when you ask people what they want to do, but like and why they purchase this product. And usually it's that remote control aspect of things. Like it's the simplest thing. It's the reason they bought a smart thermostat so they can control it when they're not there, right? So that ends up being one of the main answers to that question, just that convenience, and then the scheduling. I will say, like we keep track of statistics on like how often certain features are used, and scheduling itself, again, another obvious reason to have a smart thermostat like this, is used by more than 70% of our users' devices. So so that's great, because there's also statistics out there about programmable thermostats where it's in the maybe low teens of people that actually program a schedule into a programmable thermostat. So one of the benefits of a smart thermostat is the ease of the interface and how simple it is. And that's what you want, right? When you're building a product, and really our goal is to save energy and save money, you want the things that are going to do that, and scheduling is one of the main ways. You want that to be as easy as possible.
Okay.
People often request dark mode in the app too. Is very popular request.
Really? Okay. Interesting. We got a few more questions. So from Laughter, how much time did you spend validating the idea?
This is the initial idea. That part was a little before my time. I think safe to say, though, the idea came about probably sometime in 2014 to 15 time range, and didn't really get going until 2016. So there was definitely a lot of thought and consideration and vetting of that idea in that time frame. And I think most of 2016 was probably figuring out technical feasibility, and then especially the end of the year, the pre-orders, trying to get the handle on the consumer demand. So I can't put a specific time frame, but definitely in the months to years time frame, and is probably accurate.
Okay. I have a follow-up question from Iman. Are you considering creating an API for better integration of your thermostats with other smart home hardware, or using services like Ifttt, Integromat, or Zapier? Maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong.
Zapier, yeah. No, that's close. Yes, that's a great question. And it is definitely something we're looking at right now. I already talked about the smart home platforms, Google, kind of the big three, Google, Alexa, HomeKit, and we believe we actually are compatible or have been compatible with Ifttt and SmartThings, the Samsung integration, starting from our initial baseboard product. But there's not a broad interest in those ecosystems. It's not a huge draw for us. So we've put less focus on them. We really think those big three platforms are where the industry is going, and so put more focus on those. In terms of creating our own API, that is definitely something that we're looking at and in some cases working on right now. We want to be able to we also want to work with utilities, and one of the things that the presentation doesn't touch on is the ability to use our smart devices for like controlling your heat during demand response. So demand response is giving the ability to a utility to turn down or turn off certain appliances in your home, and creating an API that interfaces with utilities to enable that is something that we're actively pursuing. Whether that kind of transitions to give like individual users control remains to be seen, and it's something that we're also looking at.
No, that's very cool functionality you're looking at. A follow-up question from Victory: would you consider your product design at Mysa to be more bottom-up, with key decisions being made by engineers and PMs, or top-down with decisions being made by executives with PMs and engineers implementing?
That's a great question. It's definitely a balance, or we try to make it a balance. And I'll say, like, given the size of our team, the executive team, whatever, is been really close to and involved in like the product design and those types of decisions kind of throughout the first 3 years of the company. So yeah, like Josh and Zach, our CEO, our founders and CEO, COO, definitely very interested in that aspect of it. So there's definitely a lot of input from the executive leadership team, but then also a ton of input and feasibility and just validating the things that we're looking at from the technical team. And I mentioned the product team during our presentation. So we have PMs now, just recently, like within the last 6 to 12 months, that are embedded on each team. So they're now taking a much more active role in helping to figure out those requirements. So it's been a mix, and it's a balance, but so I'll say it's not extremely weighted one way or the other right now.
Oh, great. That seems like a very holistic way to approach it. So we're almost out of time. Howard, we've got one more question in the chat.
Yep.
How do you manage security when using consumer microcontrollers like ESP? For example, securing the code flashed on the microcontroller.
So securing that code, we obviously encrypt everything, and the connections are all encrypted. So that's how we secure that the actual code and the firmware that actually gets loaded. But it's a great question about security in general, and something that we're now spending a lot more time on. And it's becoming a much more common question as the world becomes more security focused in general and privacy concerned. We actually just hired a chief information security officer and a cybersecurity analyst to the team to kind of beef up our security program and to make sure we are doing all the things to make sure our products are as secure as possible, and all the customer data is as secure as possible, and things like that. So yeah, security is becoming is much more top of mind and a very important aspect.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Howard. Since we're since we're a little over time, thank you, Howard, so much for coming in to chat with us today. We had a lot of great conversation, and I appreciate everybody who came out to attend. When you close up your meeting, you're going to be emailed a survey. That is 100% optional and anonymous. So if you don't feel like answering that or responding, that's okay. But we'd love to get your feedback on our presentation today and how we can continue to improve and scope things for our next presentations. We'll be having another presentation in about a month's time, and keep your eyes peeled for an advertisement about that. And to keep up to date, please join us on Slack. So thank you everybody for attending, and again, Howard, thank you so much for your time.
No problem. Thanks, Kyle, and appreciate all the questions today. Thanks, guys.